everybody. Welcome to The World This Week. World leaders unite in Paris. The United States is missing.
And I think it's fair to say that we should have sent someone with a higher profile.
Mounting tension in Europe. Belgian police storms a terrorist network.
Était sur le point de commettre des attentats terroristes.
Meanwhile, Boko Haram slaughters 2,000 people in Nigeria.
Which was centered on making the Muslim.
And ISIS keeps killing people, this time 2 Russians by a boy. These are some of the issues we'll touch upon this week. With us this Sunday are Barbara Opal-Rome, Defense News Bureau Chief in Israel. Hi, Barbara.
Hello, hello.
Alon Pinkas, former advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Hi.
Hello, Jacob.
Alon, are we seeing a new Europe in terms of fighting on terrorism?
In a way, yes, because if you believe the security organs in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in other countries, there are dormant cells. Dormant cells of ISIS, gone to Syria, came back. Dormant cells of not just ISIS, but any other Islamic jihadist, world jihadist, call them what you want. And so it's in Europe in the sense that the urgency to act on behalf of the terrorists apparently increased. It's not in New Europe in terms of the relations with these with Muslims in general and the Muslim communities in each particular country. But obviously, once this happened in Paris, it's in New Europe in terms of awareness, readiness, preparedness, and so on.
Barbara, there are talks about some sort of a Patriot Act in France. Do you foresee a U.S.-style war on terrorism, so-called, in Europe?
I think we're already seeing it, and it's a different type of war. It's a campaign, really, and it's going to be an open-ended campaign, and it's going to be conducted a lot in the shadows. It's going to be conducted as much or even more than the military forces, with intelligence agencies, with, as you said, people manning computers, looking for patterns, bank transfers, social media. It's going to be an all-out war on terror, but as Alon said, because of the difficulties within each of these countries for different reasons in even defining what is terror, I doubt that it will be effective, but at least lessons should be learned in terms of sharing intelligence and moving it beyond the kinetic operations to in the interior ministries, policing agencies, and the banking transfers.
And action. You need commitment when you declare a war on terrorism. Do you see commitment there?
You need, first of all, you need to change your mindset to understand that this is not sporadic and this is not going to disappear. That this is, as Barbara said, I think correctly, it's an open-ended campaign. You need intelligence cooperation, i.e. intelligence sharing on the highest level. You need structural changes within countries. Part of the problem of what happened in France was an integration of police and general security service organs that were bureaucratically merged, but did not produce the same level of efficacy.
They didn't even have the same, they couldn't speak on the same radios.
Well,
Things like interconnectivity, interoperability need to be addressed.
Right, and you need the French to cooperate with the British, and you need a data bank, and you need this to be...
And guess what? They need to cooperate with Israel as well.
And they need to cooperate a lot with Israel, and a lot with the US, and a lot with Russia. And then you have minor partners in this, say Sweden, Denmark, whose idea and concept of human rights and civil liberties may be different than the Brits. And so Europe is not America. There's no difference between Tennessee, New Hampshire, and California. But there is a major difference between Italy, Sweden, and Ireland.
I mean, we're talking about, from Mali, across Africa, up through the Middle East to the Pakistan-Afghanistan border.
And within those countries. What you do not have in the U.S., you do not have relatively large Muslim communities in the U.S.
And look what's happening with ISIS. With no interruption, they keep slaughtering people. It was 2 Russians this week. What's going on? Where's the world? Where's the war on terrorism?
They keep moving the bar. You think that we've seen it all, and there's no, that this is the end of the audacity and of the bestiality that's become their modus operandi, and each time we're were surprised and shocked afresh. They are really motivated and with no holds barred, and it's a phenomenon that's very, very hard for the West to handle. Maybe the Russians will be a little bit more effective in combating this, but this is a whole new phenomenon that needs to be.
Not to mention 2,000 people slaughtered in Nigeria, by Boko Haram.
I was going to get to that. I wish that the world would be as caring, compassionate, and discerning when it comes to Nigeria as it was with France. But I'll tell you something else. I don't want to frighten or be a merchant of fears to our viewers. There are 300 million Muslims in India. There are over 150 million Muslims in China. There are Muslims in what used to be the Soviet Union but borders Russia these days. This could expand way beyond a small town in northern Iraq or a border town in Syria. This could be a major thing. Now, by the way, you started with Russia. We had this discussion before going on air. I think someone in ISIS made a mistake by killing 2 Russians.
We'll see about that in the near future.
And they may live, I hope, they will live to regret, not to live to regret this.
Alon and Barbara, thank you very much. Great seeing you again.
Thank you.
Not only in France, the rise of anti-Semitism is evident in many parts of Europe. In Germany, for example. From Berlin, we are joined by Ms. Deirdre Berger, director of the AJC Berlin Office. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
What was the reaction in Germany after the French terrorist attacks?
There was an immediate reaction in Germany, a great wave of solidarity. I think a lot of feelings of being very close to what happened. This is much different in some ways than 9/11, which had a great impact also in Germany because many of the perpetrators came from Germany. This happened in France, very, very close, a stone's throw, so to speak, from Germany. And maybe in a way, for the first time, the Germans are starting to feel they, too, could be objects of terror.
We saw Chancellor Merkel marching in Paris and later in Berlin in a pro-Islamic demonstration. Was this a double message?
There was a demonstration in Berlin last night, on Tuesday night, with Chancellor Merkel, with President Joachim Gauck, with members of the cabinet, of parliament, and it was called by the Muslim organizations. I think there were a lot of questions after this rally. What exactly was the message? Of course, there was a lot of solidarity with the victims in Paris. There wasn't as much discussion we would have liked, although there were references to the Jewish victims. But what at first seemed to be a demonstration to express solidarity with victims in France, to express concerns about anti-Semitism, seemed to some at the end to be more an expression of sympathy with Muslims out of concern that they too could become targets in reaction to what happened in Paris. This could be a problem, but it didn't seem to be the most pressing issue of the evening.
Well, it seems that many European politicians are mostly concerned about their rivals in the extreme right. Is that true?
I think in Germany there's certainly concern about the rise of populism. There's been, for the last 2 months, weekly demonstrations, particularly in Dresden, but other German cities, of citizens concerned about Islam, who are marching on the streets and saying Germany is facing a complete Islamization. It's an exaggeration. There's a lot of racism coming out, and the particularly conservative parties, but everyone is concerned about what's being expressed on the streets, that this take too much space, public space. So in some ways, with the entire German government in Berlin standing up on a stage to protest the events in Paris, they were also sending a message that populism is not helpful here. Populist right-wing parties are becoming stronger, and if there's one thing we know, anti-Semitism is a thread that links all of these movements. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's more open, sometimes it's less open, but unfortunately it's always there in the background, and sometimes it's not just the background.
French Jews have been talking about emigrating to Israel. Do you hear similar voices in Germany now?
The situation in the German Jewish community is somewhat different. While people are upset and while the question by some is being asked, is Europe a long-term home? There's been much less discussion about Aliyah to Israel. But I think there's certainly a lot of concern, strong ties to Israel, a lot of concern about the French Jewish community. But for the moment, there's been much less discussion in the German Jewish community about Aliyah to Israel. On the other hand, we have a large and fluctuating number of Israelis who are coming in particular to Berlin.
Right.
So if anything, there seems to be a stronger Israeli-German bridge at the moment.
Ms. Berger, thank you very much for joining us from Berlin. Thanks.
You're welcome.
With us now is Bret Stephens, a columnist and a deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much for joining us here in Israel.
Pleasure to be on your show.
Your book's title says it all, America in Retreat. Are we seeing the decline of the American empire?
Yes, we are not seeing the decline of the American empire. The book is called Retreat, not Decline. And the difference is that retreat is a political choice. One president can make it, and another president can reverse it. Decline is something that happens to defeated countries or exhausted countries. So Britain, for example, after 1945 was in decline. I make an argument in the book that America is not in decline. On the contrary, it's on the rise economically in many respects. Just look at the strength of the dollar in the last few years. But we have made a political choice for retreat, militarily, strategically, that is now creating power vacuums around the world, being filled by groups like ISIS or by leaders like Vladimir Putin.
Well, you mean Obama made this choice?
Yes, I mean, Obama came to office promising what he called nation building at home. He said the tide of war is receding. He said Al-Qaeda was on a path to defeat. And the consequence of these various American withdrawals from Iraq, from Afghanistan, a dramatic reduction in the size of the U.S. military is that it has created a perception around the world that the United States is no longer as committed today as it was 10, 20 years ago.
And that may change if Republicans take over the White House?
Well, it depends on which Republicans. I mean, one of the interesting facts about this American retreat is that this is a bipartisan phenomenon. Obama wants to retreat from global commitments for the sake of making bigger government. People like Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, want to retreat for the sake of smaller government. So the ends differ, but in a sense, the means are the same. The great question is, what will be the Republican foreign policy entering the presidential contest of 2016? I think that's what the primaries are going to tell us.
But is it necessarily negative to retreat, as Obama did?
Well, it depends on what you're retreating from. I mean, there are some retreats which are prudent and wise. Churchill had to retreat from Dunkirk in 1940. But Churchill also knew that wars are not won by evacuations, as he famously told the House of Commons. It's difficult in a world that has known the security and the steadiness of American powers ever since 1945. I mean, the point I come back to is when you create power vacuums around the world, those vacuums will be filled. And they're not going to be filled by nice little committees of New Zealanders and Costa Ricans. They're going to be filled by very roguish characters. We don't want to enter a world where the Irans, the Russias, the Chinas feel emboldened and confident.
Let's take the latest move with Cuba. Isn't this a show of strength by Obama in a way?
Because Cuba's oil patron, Venezuela, is in terrible trouble, the U.S. could have extracted probably much greater concessions from Raul Castro. I mean, Cuba has been a kind of a neuralgic problem for the United States for 50 years, but objectively, Cuba is a relatively small country of 11 million people, very small economy. It's not all that strategically significant, but it doesn't make all that much of a difference. So we should make sure, the United States should make sure that we're engineering a policy that doesn't simply shore up the Castro regime when it is in economic trouble.
When you look at the American policy in the Middle East, is this also part of the retreat?
Well, so far it has been, and that's why the Middle East now looks the way it does today. If you look back at 2009, there was a moment of opportunity for American policy. You had an Iraq war that seemed at least to have been won, the Iraq that was stabilized. You had Iran in tumult and a real possibility for peacefully and democratically getting rid of the Iranian regime by supporting the Green Revolution. There were a lot of things actually going for U.S. policy just a few years ago. But the consequence of a policy of calculated and deliberate inaction has not been to bring about a Middle East where there is a greater promise of peace. It's to bring about a Middle East in which the bad guys seem to be winning. Hezbollah and Iran on the one side, and ISIS and Sunni jihadism on the other. I don't think that's good for the U.S. It certainly doesn't seem to be good for Israel.
Bret Stephens, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.
This has been The World This Week. We'll see you here next Sunday. Have a great week.